Well, I think it's clearly top of mind for the schools as well, and as a parent, I can understand that. So we are under obligation to provide a plan to the state by July 24th. We are working on that. We have been working on that. The first kind of summary report of the reopening committee was released Monday afternoon, early evening. A survey has also gone on to parents to see who will opt in or out for transportation, to understand if parents are comfortable with transportation. That will help us plan. Similarly, part of the state order is that parents have the option to have an e-learning school education at this point. So that survey went out to see what people are comfortable with at this moment in time. Understanding everything there is flexible. Parents, there's been some questions, do parents have the ability to change their mind? They do. Education is a guaranteed right, but what we're trying to do is get as much data as we can to come up with the best plan we can now, and then kind of urge everyone's patience with that, because as COVID rolls out, as the environment changes, those plans may also continue to change. We have an update tomorrow morning, so I'm a day early coming to you all. We have an update tomorrow morning. The superintendent has told me he's been meeting with administrators all week to both take those summary recommendations and then look at a much smaller group and see how they can implement, or if there's anything they need to add to it. So I would say it's an ongoing process. I have been told that the state is at this point requiring 5 days open, all children in schools 5 days. There's been some talk about other districts, different plans. I've heard that those have not been received well by the state and they've gone back to the drawing board. So I think that we're being, I know everyone wants an answer. I think we're being very, what it might feel like we're being conservative by not giving an answer is we're trying to do very thoughtful planning and make sure this is done well. And then we would anticipate, I believe, further kind of revisions throughout the summer as this goes. The State Board of Education just changed the school day requirement from 180 to 177 to allow for 3 days of COVID training.
3 days is not much of a...
It's not much, but it's something, right?
Yeah,
and I do think in talking to teachers and parents, everyone wants to understand, how do I do this? I mean, we are asking teachers now maybe to teach behind plexiglass or in front of webcams, which they have a little bit of practice for. But masks all day, what does that look like for small children versus high school students? So there's just a lot of factors. I do anticipate, although the board has not discussed this, that Mr. Zagrodzky, we will be in further conversations throughout the summer. I have not seen a final plan, but kind of in all the conversations, I add dollars and cents and I see them coming.
Okay, we like adding cents, not dollars, but that's okay.
I agree with you, as long as we can do it safely for our staff and our students. So I haven't seen those figures, but I just want to keep that top of mind, that as I look at this, I don't see a way to do this within our current budget. But we will shake every tree before we come back to you. But once we do, it will really be based on how do we run schools for the health and safety of children. So that's kind of our process in where we are. And then I would imagine that we'll have more updates as we go. But certainly Thursday we have a retreat, and this is one of the top items on it, so we will learn more. There have been hour-long meetings every single day since we got the state plan, and as a district we were planning well before that, but then we now have to tailor it to those plans. That's kind of where we are. If anyone has questions on those, Kate?
Yeah, if you survey with the parents, if a certain number opt out of transportation, does that relieve you in any way of the state burden of you have to provide transportation, a bus for so many kids?
No.
No.
And there's the sticky wickets, right? So we're taking a lot of traditional models in a non-traditional environment and trying to make them all fit. So it doesn't even really relieve us if someone opts out now and then opts back in October, or so we have to plan. I do think, and I kind of the Darien community has always been so good and supportive of schools that it's worthwhile to do, to see if we can tell people what type of spacing could occur on buses. Can their child, I mean, some parents really don't have an option other than a bus. And so we feel that we need to provide it, but if we can provide them with enough information that you're looking at this many kids on a bus, they can make informed decisions.
So my next question is,
Mhm.
so say you get a bus route that only has 10 kids, so you could do it with the short bus.
Mhm.
Would your contract allow you to mid-year, if all of a sudden you got 20 kids on that bus route, be able to go to a full-length bus? Or
So right now, the bus companies have been very good on our contracts with us, and in fact, given COVID and everything, we didn't even revert to the annual increases. We kind of froze the contract, and they were willing to do that. So they've been very flexible with us. I'm not entirely sure, and I can check with Rich. In some cases, knowing that this is fluid, I'm not sure that we would put a short bus on because the savings wouldn't be enough. We might keep the full bus on in the event of, plus it would allow for more spacing. But I think that the bus company we have been working with, so from a financial standpoint, I think that we're in a good position now. It's a matter of looking at how many kids are on bus, and so the parents know when they put their child on the bus what the approximation is to another student, as best we can. And as that changed, we would have to update people so that they can make informed decisions.
Are teachers comfortable coming back to school?
That's a great question. I would say,
I guess I'd follow on and say, is there a risk that teachers will not be comfortable coming back to school?
so I think it depends. I mean, if you look federally, we're really not getting any guidance on that. If you look, so that we've been talking with our union. I think the union always has concerns that are reasonable to understand. I think the question is, how do we now take reasonable concerns and fit them again into this situation? So I do think there are some teachers who are concerned. The state also provides, and the district will provide, if we have online learning for some students, we need online teaching for some students. So there are opportunities to meet and mix and match where we can. I think we're working closely with the union to understand all of the concerns. The union has had representation in all, maybe there's an exception of 1 or 2 meetings, but the union has had representation all along and has been at the table and will continue to be at the table on this. So it's a little bit of the state says 5 days a week, kids back in school 5 days a week. The union and their representation have if concerns, they can bring them to the table, and we're kind of committed to working those out the best we can. But it's complicated.
Balancing act.
Questions for Tara? No? Okay, John?
Okay, things are a little less exciting with the Board of Finance, though only marginally so. I guess the first thing I'd say is we're certainly committed to what I said before and to what you brought up, Tara, about the Board of Finance convening. Should there be a request or a need for funding as your plans come into focus. So absolutely, anytime this summer or whenever that comes up, if there needs to be a discussion about planning once you've both decided that, and then have a clear view as to what those costs might be. Absolutely, we'll have a discussion about that and as many public sessions as needed to flesh all that out to sort of mutual comfort to get something in place. But I remain committed to what we said before, which is the funding is there. That's part of the reason we have fund balance, those sorts of things. And I think if we've shaken the trees to make sure that we come up with plans that both achieve the objective you laid out, which is safety of students and teachers, everybody in the building, if you will, but also does it in a way that says that a reasonable person could look at it and say, you know what, that's done pretty efficiently and that makes good sense and accomplishes that goal. Absolutely, let's have a conversation about that. Our agenda for the summer is pretty light. We're about to follow up on something we described at the last meeting, which is working with the Board of Selectmen on all these reserve accounts. It's kind of interesting. These, just by way of informing everybody watching, these reserve accounts are set up to pay for lots of things. They're the headline ones around fire apparatus, but there's lots of other reserve accounts that are used for a variety of capital projects. And the theme of all these is to say, well, let's define that project, let's appropriate these funds, and let's have those funds in an account so that can be spent over the life of that project. In some cases, if the project is particularly large, what you can do is you can accrue money into those reserves so that when it comes time to spend the money's already there, it's been taxed, it doesn't result in a taxpayer shock, if you will, with the money having to be appropriated, say, in a single fiscal year. So that's the theme behind all of this. The question is, though, around what sorts of things should we have reserves for? How do we manage the reserve accounts once they're put in place? How do we clean out or adjust those reserves as the project maybe evolves in terms of its mission or scope? All of that stuff. And so I think the point of initiation on a lot of this thinking really is the Board of Selectmen. So what we're going to do is sort of fast follower, if you will, or work tightly with Jamie and the other selectmen to try and both define the scope of everything that we're looking at and then come up with a policy and procedure to I think provide just better governance of all those different reserve accounts. It's not a big deal. There's not a massive amount of money in these accounts really, except for the fire apparatus reserve account. But there's lots of little ones, and I think just cleaning that up just feels like good hygiene, so we're going to be working on that. We're also talking at our meeting next week about credit card policies, so we're going to be discussing that. I'd like to talk to you before that to make sure that...
It seems like we hear this.
Well, but this is one of these things that, and this is not just bringing the thing back onto the agenda. We need to actually exhume it. It's been buried, and so there's going to be an excavation, and we're going to get it back on the table. So I definitely want to cover that. And at the next OBC meeting, I'll give an overview of the 2019-2020 results just for the budget, so where we ended up on surplus, fund balance, all of that, and give a clearer picture then, but that's about it on my end. Any questions?
We've gone cashless, just in general.
Yeah, that's very.
Because of
Yeah.
coronavirus, so much of what we do is, even the coffee, I never would pay for a coffee with a card, and now we're doing it.
Well, now people just refuse cash. They don't want to touch it.
Right. So it's time to exhume, as you say.
Yes.
We still have.
Exhume and approve. What?
We still have people.
Yeah, there's a lot of people who, well, that's still their money.
Taxes, okay with.
Taxes, yes.
They pay with cash or check?
Okay, with cash.
Cash.
Cash money.
But it's becoming a smaller and smaller group,
Oh, yeah, yeah.
so
No, I've just
binary
I've
system.
had places that would look at the cash and ask me if I have a credit card instead of Apple
Yeah.
Pay or something. I finally learned how to use Apple Pay. I'm now Mr. 21st Century, so.
You're ahead of me, John.
She's been in 19th century. Welcome.
Uh,
Okay, anything else for John? No, we'll look forward to working with you on that stuff.
Yeah, thank you.
Appreciate that. Steve?
Good morning, everybody. Terry, sorry for back of the head. I
No.
apologize. It's a little bit back of the year, there you go. Planning zoning still moving forward. We have our meetings basically every week. I think we had last week off, and we do have next week off, which is kind of fun. Last night, we voted to approve and directed staff to approve a resolution for a building called 1897 Post Road. It's the international building at the top, international tile building at the top of Rings End Road. The developer is the Vaccaro family. They're going to build 5 apartments and 2 retail stores, which is going to be 20% affordable. It's going to be another great thing for our town.
So right opposite Norotan Fire Department.
Directly across the street.
And say, across the street from St. Luke's. Okay.
Exactly, yeah.
Great.
It's about a 10,000 square foot building. It's going to match the height of the Norotan Fire Department building.
So 3 stories, you said?
It's 2.5.
2.5.
Yeah, the first 2 floors are like 4,000 square feet, and the 3rd floor is like 2,000 feet.
When you say 2.5 stories, how is the half story counted? It's not half
Fourth-
height.
It ends up being like 4,000 divided, and then top floor is 2,000. That's the way houses
Got
are
it,
developed in
okay.
town.
All right, thank you.
Houses are 2.5 stories, and people have, when it goes like this,
Right.
the square footage of this level ends up being half
So
the
it's
other
based
one.
on square footage, not height of ceiling?
It
height
is
of
actually,
building.
it is height of ceiling. No, you're right, because the ceiling goes like this.
Right.
It's this part, when it gets cut off, it's not really called usable,
Oh,
because it's under
Interesting.
the eave.
okay.
It got, the design of it got rave reviews in the first shot from the Architectural Review Board. I think they came in with their plan and they got approved immediately. It's a really pretty building. It looks like a house. Yeah, so I'm kind of excited about that. That whole neighborhood going from
Yes.
The fire station to the corners where Puritan was, that people are
Yeah.
upset that Puritan is kind of sort of new now.
Well, and it was the mercantile center of Darien.
Yeah,
For
way back when.
hundreds of years.
Yeah, so it comes back to like, that's great stuff to see, all those apartments are
Actually,
done.
right above you.
Yeah, that's.
It's a little further down, it's about a quarter mile down the road, but that was the center of Darien.
Yeah, that's Wings and Red, right?
Yeah.
So that's something nice to see. There was a little back and forth with neighbors with regards to screening and bushes and building height and whatnot, but I think we kind of worked that out and got settled. It was unanimously approved to go forward with it. And the 20% affordable housing thing kind of sort of makes me happy, because that's our goal in town.
Did you say 2 retail spaces?
Yes, 2 retail spaces. They can be, 2,000, 3,000, or
Yeah.
2,000, they can move around. Mr. Vicara has built 2 buildings in that neighborhood with 8 apartment units so far and 5 retail stores, and it's fully occupied. We did have to do a couple text changes for that in that specific neighborhood. You're only allowed to have a maximum unit size of 1,000 square feet for an apartment. He's gonna build 2 bedroom and 1 bedroom apartments, so we lifted the size from 1,000 square feet to 1,200 square feet to make the 2 bedroom apartments more marketable.
Right, sounds reasonable.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, and
Practical.
the square footage of the building doesn't change at all, because he could have put in 7 one-bedrooms in the building if he wanted to, within the same square footage. So I think that's gonna be a nice thing, and knowing him, he moves pretty quick. I bet you he's gonna be up and running in less than 24 months.
He does great work, very
Yeah.
quality work.
With that said, relative to planning and zoning and affordable housing, the one thing I do want to say related to that project, we published a study, if you remember, back in March, that over the last 20 years, Darien has put in 31.4% affordable housing in our town. This study was posted by the Planning and Zoning Department in March. I don't know if a lot of people saw it or not. Our requirement as a town is 12% of new construction has to be affordable, and the state requirement is 10%. So we are doing, in my opinion, a great job to try to catch up to that affordable housing thing. We are not chasing moratorium points, we're chasing physical units for people to live in. Last night, we also did the final approval for 34 Old Kings Highway. That is another building that is on the back of 1020 Post. It's gonna be a 5,600 square foot 2-story office building with a 1,300 square foot rooftop terrace. Rooftop outdoor terraces are a new thing in the real estate market, whether it be commercial or residential. People like to stand on the roof of their houses. They used to be on the ground floor, now they're up on the roof.
What number is it, 34?
It's 34, so it goes 36 on the corner,
Right.
then there's this little
It's a
White
little
House.
house, correct,
Then
okay.
there's 30 Old Kings Highway, which
It's the
is
silver building.
the silver multi-tenant building that's
Right.
got like shared office space.
Right,
It's right jammed in there.
okay.
We have to do another text amendment and some zoning changes too. The lot, the physical tax lot is actually a triangle. It comes to a point, and the point is in the middle of the parking lot. And the setback line has gotta be like, 15 feet or 17 feet from 30 feet from the back, but it goes like this. So you never get there, so we have to do some adjustments on that, but
Fun.
from any person's eye, you'd never be able to tell. And in that, we're also getting, there's a little bit of a quid pro quo. The 3rd story terrace is not required, so we're getting a permanent easement through the property for parking that's being given to the town. In exchange for that, we're allowing them to do the rooftop terrace. That's a plan that's been in place since before my time. We get permanent easements for 3rd stories or upper floors or front plazas. And we're also getting a front plaza on that one too. Last night, we also approved, this is a fun meeting for me because we approved a lot of stuff. We approved Glen Liquors. Glen Liquors was one of the last locations in Darien that was in Roden Heights that did not find a home. They found a home in the old Kennedy's Barbershop Club, which is between the Darien Sport Shop and Webster Bank. The weird thing about Kennedy's Barbershop Club, in the past resolution, which the past special permits stay permanent, in that building, it said specifically you cannot serve liquor inside the barber shop. I guess the barbershop club is a franchise or as a company, used to have, liquor in all their other locations. In this location, they never allowed it. So we had to allow the barbershop to have liquor, so the next tenant, which is a liquor store, could have liquor. That was kind
Can
of
cut
interesting.
hair.
Interesting.
Yeah. They also have on-site parking on that site, which was a little bit of a question.
So, question though, it's close to Sipster's. Is there a minimum distance required between?
There was a minimum distance
Package stores?
required between stores, I'm gonna say back after Prohibition. Darien did adopt it. I don't really know when Prohibition was around, but I heard about it and I wasn't born. It existed in town up until 2020. It was abolished when, and the story goes, there was a thing called Darien Discount Liquor. That building, if you remember, it's up by where Darien Diner is and all
Right.
those buildings, across the street from the Herald Shop. That building burnt to the ground at one point in time, and I remember when I was here. That
Oh,
was
I
like
remember that.
1999.
Yes.
They wanted to relocate to Goodwife Shopping Center.
Right, I remember this.
There was a
issue.
prohibition
And that's
in
why I asked the
town.
question, actually, yeah,
That prohibition was lifted in 2020, which is 20 years ago.
for that,
Correct.
You mean
okay.
2000, not 2020.
2000, yeah. Two bunch of
Yeah.
zeros. But I know it's 20 years ago. The controlling factor in liquor stores, Darien, and I think I might have said this before, as a town, we have 7 liquor store permits issued by the state of Connecticut. It's a small town. There's some liquor stores that are close to each other, like Lear's and the Old Glen Liquors. But,
Oh, you're right, good point.
So for a town,
Right.
there are always liquor stores that were around. So this is one of the 7th liquor store permits in town that has to be in our town. And this was a location they found. I think the Palmers did want them to stay. The Palmers offered them a trailer in their parking lot while it was under construction, like the post office did. I don't think the state of Connecticut really wants a liquor store inside a trailer. The Palmers declined anyway. What else? The other thing it's not really part of my purview, but the question came up, and it did hit me. I think the town is gonna have sidewalk sales in July. They're not calling them sidewalk sales.
Yeah, Darien sale days.
Okay. That was something that came to the Planning and Zoning Commission. We blanket approved it with administrative approval to do outdoor sales. Where we really don't get involved, it was a question to us. The only thing I know about that is in the past they've had like bouncy houses, things for kids to play in.
Right.
Yeah, that doesn't happen anymore. No. I think that's it for me. I'm looking at my list here. That's pretty much everything. In terms of when you guys say things are busy or not busy, we have a meeting on the 28th and we're off for the entire month of August. So I'll see you
Steve, you
September
just
3rd.
jinxed yourself.
What's that?
You just jinxed
I was
yourself.
saying,
Yeah.
Never say that out
There's
loud.
a karma over Darien public officials if you say that way. Hey,
So-
one question, so the federal guys have made a lot of progress over on Stop and Shop, but it looks like work stopped at the Palmer's thing. What was the status of that?
I did want to mention that. That did come up in our director's comments and our chairman's comments yesterday at our meeting. I'm not 100%, Stop and Shop's going forward, Corbin's going forward. Palmer's did get slowed down by COVID. Yesterday morning at 7:05, they were bringing in Cultec units into the Palmer site. And this morning at 7:03, they were bringing in Cultec units in the Palmer site. So we asked Jeremy to check into it. Cultec units are those big concrete things that are the size of the desk. And they had tractor trailers coming in and dropping off in their parking lot. So they're moving things onto the site. Whether construction starts again and they start to throw a lot of people in there, I don't know, but we've been asked to look into it, so we'll look into it, find out what the story is.
Steve,
Jeremy did not have an answer yesterday.
I got a question, and I just want to make sure I'm accurate, because last time you talked a lot about, I think at the federal property, the flood mitigation that's gone in, right, or going in?
Where? Yes.
Downtown, okay,
Million
because
gallons of water.
as we
Yep.
do buses, I'm getting the questions about walkers, and is the flood, and I wanted to make sure I was accurate. I said, federal property, that work is ongoing, shouldn't be a problem going forward. So I imagine in terms of a flood zone, if people have to walk, they should, or choose to walk, they should feel comfortable that that it's mitigated as much as we can at this point.
2-point answer.
Okay,
One is the Coltech units that holds the millions of gallons of water are basically done. If you go up there now, you can look at it, it's already been blacktopped over for the most part, and it's already been striped as a parking lot. So that piece is done. They're gonna put in a little bit more on the, I'm gonna call it the west side, when they start to build the Stop and Shop building, and they're gonna build a foundation for Stop and Shop, there's gonna be a basement. So the flood issue should be fine.
okay.
The issue that did come up, and the phone call did not come into planning and zoning yesterday in the last week, maybe it went to First Selectman's office or somebody else's office. They're doing on-site grinding of the debris that they're pulling out of the ground. And about a week ago, I think something happened where the on-site debris, it's got through blasting, came out and struck a car on West Avenue.
Oh, I did, yeah.
I didn't hear about it, I found out about it last night. Federal, which is a great company and has good contracts and good construction managers, were made aware of it. They changed some things that they're doing. That chipping and that grinding is not supposed to go on for a long time. But last night I made a point saying that we have to make sure we're on top of this, because when kids start walking up Heights Road and up West Avenue, and there could be potentially debris flying from grinding and chipping machine, that's not a good thing.
Okay,
So-
so maybe we can just talk offline and get a schedule, kind of our timeline, just so if anyone asks, because I did
Yeah.
get that question. It wasn't in related to that, but I did hear about that incident, and maybe as long as I'm fully briefed, I
Okay.
can give the right information out.
What I would like to try to find out is what's the stop date of that chipping and of
Mhm.
that grinding, and I don't know what that is.
Great, thank
But
you.
we'll find out.
I would say it would be reasonable to encourage kids that are walking to not walk the Heights Road between Hollow Tree and Norotan Avenue. I'm not sure why they would take that route anyway, if they were going to the middle school or the high school, depending on where they're coming from, but, you know, that is the entrance to the construction site is right there at, Vavala's Deli. And there's some infrastructure.
That's the main draw right in there.
Right, exactly. So, I mean, that's a different matter. If someone's utilizing the businesses in the area, that's not a school-related issue, I would imagine. But certainly, I think that parents should encourage their kids to avoid, when they can, walking through that central construction area.
The accident or the incident, I don't know if it was an accident, incident that I heard about was on West Avenue. There
Yeah.
are no sidewalks on the, I'm gonna call it the south side of West Avenue, which is adjacent to the construction site. The brand new sidewalks that the town built are on the
On the other
north
side.
side.
You know, we've had
So
a
the
lot
kids on the
of,
sidewalk.
we've had a lot of conversation on this particular corridor, so I just wanna
Yeah.
make sure that we're up to date, and if we get questions or answers, we can provide it, so we can just talk offline, and
Perfect.
as much information as we can give people so they make an informed choice would be great.
You got
Do
it.
you know if, when the Palmers get going, if they're gonna have a similar operation with, you know, grinding of stone?
I know for, the short answer is no, I'd have to double check it.
Okay.
The short answer for Federal is Federal was only supposed to have grinding on site for phase one. They asked if they could do it for, for phase two. They asked if they could do it for phase one, we said yes, and the reason why is it cuts down on trucking.
Yeah. And do we have any idea how much longer that will be going on?
That's what I have to check. We
Okay.
do have a special spreadsheet that says everything, it's all colored, and it's
Yeah.
11 by 17, that says weeks, and
I
there
think
should be
Jeremy's on
stuff.
top of that.
I'm sorry?
I believe Jeremy's on top of that.
Yeah.
I think
Jeremy,
there was
yours?
also, I think that, the passerby that had the debris hit their car, may have been from the installation of the soil nails that were going, these crazy long soil nails had to go from, in the ground, from the face of the soil by the market, sort of into West Avenue underneath the roadway.
Yeah, they're called.
That was a
pins.
temporary,
Yeah.
thing, so. Yeah.
I mean, there's a lot of people working on it that are really, really professionals and know what they're doing. We'll double check it again.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Oh, do we want to talk about, I'm sorry, do you say you did CT?
Yeah, I was gonna get there, if you don't mind.
Go right ahead,
Yeah,
that's fine.
Okay. So a couple things from my perspective. Highland Farms is open for the public, which is great. We are in a process where our landscape consultant is meeting with adjacent neighbors to receive input, as we had promised to do, so that we can look to putting some landscaping in. We're also working with the pollinator pathway people. We're hoping to put in a meadow of native species for pollinator pathway, which would be awesome.
Very
If you
nice.
haven't been up there yet, I highly recommend it. No pun intended. It's about a half-mile walking loop, and it's the first ADA compliant walking loop in the town of Darien. It's really, really wonderful. And I just encourage you to go up and take a look. We might be coming to you because in the original construction plan, we did not budget in for landscaping. We don't know what we might need. So our consultant is putting together a plan, and then we will get that priced out and come back to you and see how and when we might be able to fund some landscaping.
I'm sorry, you're breaking up, say again?
I knew there was gonna be something
You're
coming.
giving money back, oh.
No,
yeah,
it's
that's
one of
great.
those
I'll put that
reserve
down.
funds.
Right, yeah, there's a reserve for that, we don't need it.
The idea with Highland Farm was to keep the landscape looking today as it has in the past. So we're not looking to over landscape, but we're looking to be sensitive to some neighbors that, you know, may want some landscape buffering to buffer the parking lots. We welcome Brent Hayes as our new police commissioner. He's up and running, that's great, and we will be undertaking a process shortly there was a term that ended on June 30th, so we have to do a reappointment or a new appointment for that seat, and so we'll be taking that up in the next couple of weeks. I want to express great gratitude to the variety of community partners that have had programming to help further our understanding of systemic racism. Several of us have participated in a number of outstanding programs in the last couple of weeks. YWCA and Darien Library had one this week. Everwell, the co-working space, is doing a series. They had their second in a series this week. And I'm participating with a group of about 20 people through New Presbyterian Church on a year-long educational endeavor. And I gotta tell you, I've got a stack of books like this.
Yeah.
But it's
Reading assignments.
really incredible. In addition, if anybody wants additional resources, the Darien Library has a tremendous amount of resources for folks to read. WestCog is finalizing their framework for the Darien New Canaan bike loop, and I'm working with Fred Donite in Planning and Zoning. And once we have that framework complete, we're going to put a community committee together to look at it.
Can I be on it?
Yes, you can. I'm writing your name down right now.
Please.
A number of people have expressed an interest. And you know, the idea is that we create a bike loop. We might have to make some adjustments in our roadways, put in some sharrows, put in some dedicated bike lanes where they're possible. It's not possible everywhere in Darien,
Right.
Unfortunately. And connect the places in Darien that we love, and notable places, our commercial districts, our train stations, going up through Waveney and then up into northern New Canaan, creating a really wonderful bike loop. So I'm excited about that.
With enhanced safety, which is exciting. It sounds like.
It should be with enhanced safety. I always want to be careful and say that, you know, we've certainly noticed in our COVID environment that we've had some challenges with bikers and walkers and car interactions.
Mhm.
In my mind, safety always has to start in the mind of the biker.
Right.
And so we'll look forward to bringing that forward very
Yeah,
soon.
that's exciting.
It is exciting.
Can I ask
And
my
the
question?
good news about it is that it's considered a regional project. That's why WestCog is doing it for us. And there might be some monies available for this regional collaboration to help us implement some of the roadway changes, which is great.
So you're safe.
Good.
At least for now.
Not really. You're not really, John.
She's got my number.
You're good on that
I'm not feeling
I want to
confident
do bike
at the moment.
clubs.
Signage for that?
Yes,
Okay.
yes, there'll be bike signs, and
Really
and the
nice.
suggestion is that, that it's branded signs, so
Cool.
that we can work with New Canaan on a standard sign, which would be really nice.
Awesome.
And I would love to make sure that we incorporate directing people past our historic amenities in both of our towns.
Yeah.
Terry's gonna tell us about the special session coming up. What I want to mention today is that I don't think it'll be in this first special session, but there is a push by a number of groups to move forward kind of a sweeping land use and planning and zoning reform agenda. The groups include the Senate Democratic Caucus, the Black and Puerto Rican Caucus, and a group called Desegregate Connecticut. Desegregate Connecticut is kind of a consortium of individuals and organizations statewide that wish to address desegregation and racial and economic inequity by changing land use and zoning laws, which is thought to be, from the beginning of zoning, how segregation occurred. I think everybody's familiar generally with this idea of redlining through bank lending or not bank lending. Thank goodness redlining does not exist today in the banking system, but I think we live on with the remnants of that concept in some perceived in our zoning laws. So what I want to bring to your attention are under the reform agenda of the Senate Democratic Caucus, they would like to eliminate single-family zoning. That's something that's happened in a number of states and communities across the nation. Steve and I have been talking a lot about this with Jeremy, something for us to understand a little bit more what exactly that means for us here. In terms of the Desegregate Connecticut, which is led by a very well-educated woman, Sarah Bronin. You might be familiar with her name. She is the wife of Hartford Mayor Luke Bronin, but she's also the chair of law at UConn, land use law at UConn. And she is spearheading this Desegregate Connecticut initiative, and there are essentially 10 goals of that plan. One, and I'm just going to run through them real quick as a matter of public information, and I'm going to be issuing a public document on this shortly. The first goal is to allow...
Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah.
I have a question at the end. I was just saying, this isn't
Yeah.
up for this session, you're saying this is up for...
It'll either be, they're trying to get it into the July session. If that's not successful, they're going to try and put it in a September session. And then certainly it'll be in January or February, if not September. The first goal is to allow accessory dwelling units on single-family lots as of right. And Steve can jump in here anytime because he's the expert here. The second goal is to create something that was a new concept for me called gentle density or middle housing. And basically they want to take within a quarter-mile radius of commercial corridors and a half-mile radius of fixed transit stations, ferries, rapid bus transit, and trains. 50% of the land area in those radiuses would be allowed as of right to have 2 to 4 family homes in it. The third goal is that 10% of the land in towns of 5,000 residents or more must allow as of right this middle housing, multifamily housing, mixed-use housing. They want to reduce the parking requirements for multifamily housing to levels that are slightly different than ours. They want multifamily housing to be treated exactly the same procedurally as residential housing, meaning no public hearings, no special permits. The sixth goal is that, and forgive me, Steve, but I think this is a great one. I actually like this one. 4 hours of training for planning and zoning commissioners, ZBA, volunteers, and staff, and that would include learning about fair housing regulations.
Yeah, I already have 28 every year,
Right.
like broker's license and appraiser's license
Yeah.
for the state of Connecticut.
Hopefully that'll count, hopefully. The seventh goal is that they want to eliminate the word character from state zoning law, which would mean that we would have to eliminate it from our town plan of conservation and development also. And essentially it's to, some people believe that this word character is a red flag for denying applications because something doesn't fit into your community. So they want to remove that word character from the code and its correlation or its perceived correlation to racism and segregation. The eighth goal is to convene a working group to create model regulations that can be adopted locally. There's talk that this might be a way to expand zoning to be a more regional or statewide endeavor. But it also would allow for smaller towns to have sort of off-the-shelf zoning regulations that they wouldn't have to create themselves. There'd be like a library of regulations that you could draw from. Ninth, they want to cap fees to what's considered reasonable. Right now, the Planning and Zoning Commission sometimes hires third-party consultants to make sure that, and I'd like you to speak about this, but they want to cap those fees so that towns can't impose what's deemed unreasonable fees on developers. And the last goal is, and I don't know why they tied this together because they're really two separate things, to modernize traffic and sewer standards. They want cities and towns to consider having developments be allowed to construct their own on-site sewage management systems. And then regarding traffic, right now we look at a development and we say how many numbers of vehicles is this development going to generate? They want to change that to vehicle miles traveled, and that's a concept that I'm still trying to understand. But I think basically it's if you build a multifamily housing project by a train or a bus rapid transit station, hopefully those people are getting on the transit system and not getting in their cars to drive to work. So, I mean, there's some pretty big things in here. Sarah had a press conference yesterday on the steps of the Capitol. She was joined by many different organizations. So this is absolutely moving forward, in my opinion. So we'll endeavor to bring you more information as we learn it.
In those accessory dwelling units, if I may?
Yes, please.
They're not supposed to be designated or as affordable, but they could. That's got nothing to do with affordable housing, right?
So that's something that as chief elected officials we're trying to sort out. There's nothing in the Desegregate Connecticut plan that specifically addresses affordability.
Okay.
But when you couple the 830G standards and the affordable housing laws with Desegregate Connecticut, they absolutely work hand in hand. So no, accessory dwelling units do not need to be rented at an affordable level. And I don't know if they would actually be considered as part of our housing stock. As we know with 830G, the more housing you build, the more affordable units you need. So I don't know yet if they count. I think I have more questions than answers at this point in time on that. So that's kind of it on that, unless Steve wants to add in, or Terry maybe. We need poll workers for the August 11th primary. And as Steve mentioned, the sidewalk sales are going to be slightly different in recognition of the fact that we don't want to bring large groups of people together in a way that might create an unhealthy environment. So stores are going to do their own things, and their sales will be in their stores where they can manage the numbers of people coming in and wearing of masks and using hand sanitizer. And I think that they're going to expand the number of days. The Chamber's still going to do the marketing on this event, and we hope that people will come and shop locally, but it's not gonna look like our normal sidewalk sales. There will be no outdoor activities. There will be no outdoor public gatherings of any kind. It's just a way to encourage people to come and shop at our stores and take advantage of the bargains that our retailers might have. So that's it for me.
And it's next weekend, it's not this weekend, it's next weekend.
It's gonna start on the 3rd of August.
Oh, why did I think it was the 20?
Yeah, they
No,
pushed
okay.
back the dates.
Okay.
May I just add 2 items
Yes.
relative to that? The one that Jamie alluded to was with regards to the capping the consultant fees. And this goes to you. We're gonna need more money. For example, I said we approved the 1897 Post Road project. That's got 5 units in it. I think the fee cap is $250 per dwelling unit is what they proposed.
They're proposing.
So 5 times 250 is $1,250. If we ask the developer to do a traffic study on that, and then we review it, we send it out to a peer review guy, his name is Michael Galante in that example, he charges us about somewhere between $2,000 and $3,000. We would only collect $1,250 from the developer, so the town's got to pick up the other piece. With regards to the regionalization, and I forgot to mention this earlier, I first or second heard about this through a meeting or a Zoom meeting that I had with the chairs, P&Z chairs for Darien, New Canaan, Westport, and Wilton. It was set up by, I think, Greenwich. It's kind of like the peer group that you guys use for education.
Mm-hmm.
And they knew a lot about it. They were a lot more up to speed on it with me. Where that comes into effect is if a lot of this additional housing comes into town, that's going to create more kids, which creates more school kids. To me, to my knowledge, and you can always correct me if I'm wrong, is our schools are at capacity. That's why so many schools have trailers. If it tips the scaling further, I gotta believe we're gonna have to build another school. If we get that many more kids. Some of the other towns are on this meeting I spoke about. They didn't really have that issue because they have excess capacity in some of their schools, but we do. And relative to the model zoning and whatnot, we already did a lot of that stuff already in the last 2 years. We just finished our zoning. Those other towns are looking to us to follow our zoning code, so when they revamp theirs. Do you want to speak about the affordable housing plan at all?
You can go ahead.
Okay. There's another statutory thing that's required that we are starting to work on. There's an affordable housing plan that the town is required to do. It was supposed to be due in July of 2021. Now it's due in July of 2022. The last time I think it was done for our town was Yvonne Klein was the first selectman, and I don't know how many years ago that was. That was like
A dozen years ago.
a dozen years ago. So it's kind of getting updated again. The state, well, I guess when they first passed it, and Terry always jump in too, they didn't provide any guides was supposed to be in that. They hired a consultant. The consultant now has performed guidance. Some of the towns, I think, already started to do it. There's an outline of what you have to do. Again, we're gonna have to hire a consultant that's gonna help us with this project, which is due in 2022. And like I said earlier, we've already done 31.4% affordable housing over the last 20-year period. How much more we can do with the square footage that we have, or acres we have in our town, and the amount of open space, I don't really know. The accessory dwelling units came up to us a couple of years ago, and the Planning and Zoning Commission did not really want it or approve it. Because that would be people living in your garage above your house. I mean, we're very strict with you can't have 2 kitchens on site. So people that have like a pool house with an apartment, you can have a pool house with a room that it has a bed in it, but you can't have a kitchen there. Some towns don't mind it. like maybe on Westport or Wilton, that has a 4-acre property and somebody lives in their garage. Our town is different, so.
Related to that question, a couple of years ago, we passed senior housing, it was called, nicknamed a granny pod.
Correct,
And
we
I
did
know-
not pass it.
Right, I remember that. And it was a very specific set of description of what exactly it could be, square footage. Do you know any other towns in this area that did pass it?
I don't know.
It was affordable
Yeah.
housing for
It
really
was a-
family members.
Right, it was if your mother was in a home, you're gonna put it in your
Correct.
backyard.
Right.
That was also supposed to be temporary, so when your mom moved out, for whatever reason, you're supposed to take that thing down. I looked into the math of it, it was about $1,000 a square foot to build it. You could build a house in Darien for half that. So economically, it didn't make any sense.
Okay.
But yes, you were allowed to do it, and it only had to be a senior, and it did not count against affordable housing, moratorium boards or units or anything.
Right, I remember that.
So it didn't make any sense, and we put a moratorium against them. I don't know if anybody ever built them.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, so
I'm curious to know if anybody.
They have them in like Arizona, that was the big thing.
You're right,
I was like,
you're
oh,
right.
great.
we were eager to begin the work on the affordable housing plan sooner rather than later.
Right.
But we are now feeling compelled to wait to see what happens with this legislative land use and zoning agenda before we do that. But we are, we have people on board ready to begin that process.
And that consulting fee, just so John knows, is already in our 2020
Right.
budget.
It's already been funded. So he will not be coming back to you.
I like this. Best news I've heard all day.
But Terry, for your purposes in
Yes.
Hartford, this pass-through of fees, for
Right.
cities, it's not an issue for the cities because they have on staff all of the necessary people and experts and engineers to do this peer review, look at these plans, or create plans. Smaller towns don't have that, so it's a burden. And although Sarah Bronin said that the agenda is free of cost to cities and towns, it's simply not true. I mean, if you look at, there's a variety of things, this just being one of them, the possibility of, impacting schools, which is fine, but, in my mind, to be really granular about what this means for Darien is, we will hold on thinking about plans to repurpose the Edgerton site because we may need to one day look to put a school back in that place, which it was a school one day, so that's reasonable to think. And Baker Park was once a property for a school, so there are places in town where schools can be built. I don't want to beat the drum that it's not possible here. It certainly is, but from a planning perspective, we need to be mindful of that and what that means in terms of financing.
Cherry Lawn
So
also
I
school?
think, the interesting and tricky thing about that argument is when planning and zoning approves a 5-bedroom or a 4-bedroom house, you don't do it because you're not authorized to do it with the schools in mind, right? I mean, it's not that you guys aren't thoughtful about it.
Yeah, we're very thoughtful about it.
Yeah, I mean, and I've had lots of conversations with the planning and zoning members about that and the developments, and I think the communication has always been really good with that, but there's no preclusions around that. So if we want to start saying, how do towns do this with capacity and provide the other town services, they're obligated to do it, I think that would be a great way to look at it interconnected, but we'd have to do that kind of all around on housing. Does that make sense? Like, we'd have to do it, and I think we've done it locally really well. But before we make that argument, then we would have to kind of say we'll do that on all housing and all types of developments.
What we started to do is doing bedroom counts,
Yeah.
because.
And we had asked to do bedroom counts
Yeah.
because we were
Right.
concerned about that. So
Yeah.
you guys have been super responsive to us.
And that makes sense, that this would just be a continuation of that, wherever, obviously 2 and 4 family homes bring an exponential number of bedrooms into a very concentrated area. And that's actually the goal, is to increase, in a targeted way, increase the density in certain areas within municipalities. And so it's all part of the consideration for our affordable housing plan, our school plans going forward, our financing plans, our next town plan of conservation and development. We need to incorporate all of those things. The one other thing that I want to mention that is in the Desegregate Connecticut plan is consideration for changing the way we tax properties. And it is to change to changing the balance where you tax land heavier than you tax the constructed unit on a piece of land. As it's kind of an incentive for construction.
It's an incentive for density, right? Because
Yes,
of-
Yeah.
yes.
Right now, the assessments are, your house is assessed at, for argument's sake, $100,000 for the land and $500,000 for the improvements.
Right.
What I think James alluded to is that model could switch and flip, would be $500,000 for the land, $100,000 for the improvements. And you get taxed heavily on the land. The mill rate, they'd split the mill rate probably too.
But
The
Tara,
market, you could
I
change
mean-
the percentage of market value,
Yeah.
put the land at full value and the structure at 60%.
Yeah.
But arguably, Terry, when you go up to Hartford, that again is a burden on small towns for which land versus cities and density are an issue, so.
Well, I thought it was an interesting dichotomy of argument when Sarah presented yesterday in Hartford. She gave a very moving example of her own childhood growing up in Texas and moving to a place and acknowledging that all students deserve to have access to nature, education, and a safe community. So, I mean, yes, yes to all of that.
Yes.
But there's got to be a balance between development and the impacts to the environment. I would say the one thing that is not, there's two things that are specifically not included in this agenda, and that is a recognition of the fragility of our environment, especially for cities and towns along the coastal corridor. And then I was fascinated at the fact that inclusionary zoning is not in this agenda. Yet it's a really fantastic tool that's helped this community really grow our stock of affordable housing and disperse it throughout town. So I think there's, what we've decided is that we're gonna look through the agenda, and with the help of Steve and Jeremy, we're going to give feedback and constructive input on how this agenda, or parts of this agenda, could work for small towns like Darien. Rather than just say, no, we wanna figure out how we can be
Can I ask
productive.
one last question?
Yeah.
I will take continuing education as long as John pays for it.
He will have to pay for it.
I'm not hearing well tonight. I've missed all of
For
this.
sale sign just went up.
I get the first meeting, John.
Actually, that's true. All of the meetings will pale in comparison, so.
My landscaping will be an odd lot.
My question, Jamie, is, remember we talked about this a little bit? Remember there was anything within a half mile, the train station
Yeah.
was gonna be taken over by the state and they could do whatever
Yes.
they want with it? What agenda is that on? Is that?
That,
I don't really know if that's, if
I
that's
thought that
gonna
was
crop
coming
up.
back.
That's that.
I
eminent
hear it's
domain.
coming back, that was 2015,
Yeah.
and it still is the undercurrent.
So is that-
Where's that undercurrent?
Hartford, part of the conversation with this whole group,
With this group in particular?
yes.
I haven't
That's
heard it
what
from
we've
desegregate.
heard.
I hadn't heard it from this group.
I've heard rumblings that's, so it's not anything in writing right now, but it did come up 4 years ago. And it's still an active thought.
And there
It's
was
not
that-
in writing, but
There's clearly a correlation to
Yeah.
the desire to develop
mhm.
within, a certain distance from commercial districts and transit centers.
Right.
So in that, there's a consistency there. But the other one was, the one that we're talking about now was the state having the ability to use eminent domain to take properties within those areas for their purposes.
So in this situation, they would use that half-mile radius to have their zoning laws apply rather than local zoning laws.
So that's not what this says currently. under this
What is
agenda.
that?
Well, yes, it does. I mean, desegregate Connecticut.
But it doesn't say the state will take eminent domain
No,
and put it in.
no,
They're
no.
relaxing the zoning laws and saying we
Which
need
accomplish-
this sort of density within this area.
But it accomplishes the same thing.
So, but I'm sorry, so eminent domain
Yeah.
is on the agenda that the state could come
No,
into a train
no,
station and
no.
confiscate?
It was.
property?
No.
It was.
It was, that was 2015, and
But
it
it is
did
not.
finally die after a public
Is it
hearing and
ju-
huge
Is it dead,
out.
or is it just sick?
I
With
think
this
that
piece-
if I'm
Is that
sorry,
a
Carrie,
Zoom
I think
thing
if
you
the,
used
if the
earlier?
state can find a way to achieve the end result that they desire, and that is increased density and development within a certain radius of transit and commercial districts, then they might not have to resort to eminent domain. If they can get at it through changes to land use and zoning laws, they achieve the goal.
But as a town, and this is why it's probably so important that you work through it,
Yeah.
the right people, Jeremy, Steve,
Right.
eminent domain is a far more blunt instrument
Right.
than this, because eminent domain could mean anything.
Mhm.
So as we look at what
Right.
works for towns and what doesn't work for a town, I think the approach you're suggesting is probably for wiser, this part works for us, this doesn't for these reasons.
Correct.
Because eminent domain is something very different.
I would agree.
But if-
I have the one question, when we first talked about it, when they talk about doing this changing in density, if this all happens, where are they expecting the people who like move to the new developments here to come from? Are they coming from other places in Connecticut, or are they coming from outside Connecticut? If the redistribution of the population in Connecticut, maybe they're burdening our school buildings more, but some other communities are now relieved of burden. And what do you do with the excess capacity? Or, they could be then talking about regionalizing even more. If they're coming in from out of state, then we're all going to be burdened more.
Well, my
And how do you address that?
understanding of fair housing laws is you can't decide where
Yeah,
people
but
come
I was
from.
wondering what their
Yeah.
thinking was.
I think part of the argument is that there is a feeling out there that schools in Connecticut are some of the most segregated in the country, and so either option wouldn't be bad. It wouldn't be bad to release the burdens of some, this is the argument, I'm not making it, but this is, I think, the understanding. Release the burden at some other schools, and/or Connecticut would benefit from incentivizing more people to be able to make access to certain schools. Whether this plan does it or not, I don't know, and I actually thank you. I had only heard a little bit about it, so I'll look more into it, and if we can be helpful. I mean, I think
Yeah.
you guys are probably the experts on this, let me know. But I think their argument is exactly what you're saying, Kate, that if you could release the burden in some areas by incentivizing people to move to towns, that yes, we would have to take on more burden, but other places are already overly burdened.
Yeah, and so how does that then?
I guess I would say that there's some really fundamental assumptions at the heart of that. And
Right.
one is, do they want to move here? Number one. And then the other issue, which I know that I'm sure that you care about deeply, Tara, is that I think it's fine. I think we largely all agree that having a more diverse community is a healthier community. And so, I certainly support that. But to have all of these sweeping land use changes to the exclusion of addressing the deplorable public education system in our urban centers, because school is it's so fundamental. It's fundamental to the opportunity of every child, regardless of their skin color. And so I hope that the state also takes up a way to make sure that people from Hartford and Bridgeport might be able to move to towns like Darien and Ridgefield. But also, how can Hartford and Bridgeport make meaningful improvements in the delivery of their public education to the students that live there and still want to live there? So
I'd say, just because I certainly care deeply about public education, I think here at OPC, we're trying to figure out what are the effects to Darien, and how can we plan for the
Right.
effects to Darien?
Yep.
So Terry, you can take some of these up to the
Yep.
state, and
Mhm.
Jamie and Steve to understand the effects. I'm happy to partner there.
Yep.
Where we all stand on public education and what needs to happen is probably the debates we all can continue to have. But I think OPC is how we plan operationally for the future. So
I agree. But we're town leaders, and we have thoughts on this, and they're all very interconnected. I mean, there's no question that the reason why this agenda is coming And the reason why there will be local impacts is because there is this broader discussion. So I think it's reasonable to raise the issue.
Right,
No,
absolutely.
I thank you for raising the issue. I just think that where we think public education should go is probably something we need to advocate in Hartford and then understand the effects for here.
Yep. Yep. I have nothing further, so Terry, I'll turn to you.
Well, just following up on this discussion, I think the nature, safety, and education that Sarah Bronin mentioned is something we all want for all children, and fundamentally how to find that. Desegregate Connecticut, as Jamie mentioned, it is a passionate group of people behind it. They're putting a lot of steam behind getting this passed in special session this summer. Ned Lamont has said he's not interested in doing that at this point, but we'll see. It's a big group, and many of us feel there are good pieces in this legislation proposed. I'm not sure it's not in legislative language yet, but there are certainly good initiatives in there. But we shouldn't be passing this kind of legislation in the heat of the moment. So that's,
Even in a COVID environment.
yeah, it requires more public input and more thorough process rather than, whew, this is just being tossed out of this, and it's a lot. It's a lot, and I think we have to look at all the pieces of it and what are the fundamental reasons we're doing it, and that's what's still missing from the dialogue. We are in special session tentatively next Thursday, the 23rd. They've outfitted all of our offices with we use our laptops and some sort of voting mechanism so we can vote in our office if we don't feel comfortable going into the House chamber. So the good tech wizards have done some things in Hartford. We'll be taking up absentee ballots and also potentially mail-in voting. We don't have language for either one yet, but the absentee ballot issue is very simple. We would be expanding the statutory language on why someone can vote absentee, which I think most of us fully support. So in the case of concern of a pandemic would be added to the 6 current reasons for illnesses. Mail-in voting is something we all received, a mail-in ballot for the primary. Who knew there was a primary in August for both parties, but on the presidential line, and there are some legislative races that have primaries. We all received mail-in absentee ballots for that, and that was paid for by the CARES funding from the federal government. Just for the primary, we don't have funding to do that in November. And there is concern, and reasonable concern, about the custody control and will we maintain and verify who's voting absentee. There were, on social media, a number of people got ballots for people who hadn't lived in their homes for 10 years, others family members who'd long been deceased. So that is a concern. That falls to the town clerk to verify that who is sending in the ballot is actually who's sending in the ballot. So there is some concern there. I think some states are doing mail-in voting. It's working, but we just want to make sure that we can verify and maintain custody, control, and integrity in the balloting process. The other legislation is the police accountability legislation, which certainly is in response to the situation in Minneapolis and police brutality. The big piece there is the qualified immunity. There are 27 provisions that are being worked out. It should be online soon. We got a draft version yesterday. But the qualified immunity piece is the one that the police departments are particularly concerned about. So we'll see where that goes. Hopefully we'll get bipartisan support on that. On the bill in its entirety, I don't know, gosh, I know. In its entirety, qualified immunity is the most controversial piece. So with good reason, it's controversial. The other reason for special session would be to continue telehealth coverage. Right now, we have telehealth coverage, I think, through the end of August. We extended telehealth to Medicaid and Medicare populations. So you can dial either to call your doctor and it's covered with your medical insurance, or you can do it a webinar, which I did do a doctor's visit via webinar. It was pretty cool. I mean, it was, hey, this saved me all that time. So it was, it worked well. So we're looking to extend that through end of December, possibly into early spring, which I think that makes great sense. The other reason for, we may go into another day, so these are all separate special session days, on insulin price caps, which was Senate Bill 1 this year. Strong bipartisan support. So that's it.
Telehealth,
Any questions,
Terry,
let me know.
Do you know how doctors charge for telehealth? Is it the same as an in-person visit?
Yes, and that's what this legislation did. Well, I'm not on Medicare or Medicaid, so it was private with my doctor.
Right.
So I paid the copay, and then my insurance company participates in it.
I just wondered if it was the same charge to have a telehealth appointment
Oh, good
versus
question.
if you walk in and you're face-to-face with a doctor doing,
Good question.
taking your pulse and your blood pressure and all that.
I suspect so, because it is their time, they had to schedule it, they have to get the webinar equipment. I guess, I don't know, I guess,
I think it may vary
Yeah, I was gonna say it's
by provider
case
and carrier by carrier, because we have had telehealth under our insurance since we went to Connecticut. And the cost for a virtual visit is less than the cost for an in-person visit.
how much less?
Significantly, but you're also not necessarily going to your provider. You can choose a specific provider,
Right.
or they have an array of doctors, and you just say, give me the next doctor available, and the cost is significantly less than going in person to your personal doctor. Now, it may be different if I were to go to my own doctor via webcam. Maybe that's different, but you can choose a random doctor and pay a lot less.
That does not have your chart.
Pardon?
That does not have your
Right,
chart.
and you gotta be careful about what you go to that for.
Yeah, right. For some situations, it's nice, I mean, it was
Yeah.
convenient.
Yeah.
I didn't need to be in person. So,
Okay.
anyway, good
Any
question.
questions for Terry?
With regard to the special assessment stuff, I watched Channel 12 all the time now, and yesterday they said special session is gonna be, whatever it starts. I didn't know there was gonna be 2, July and September, is what I think you said earlier. But they have like the 4 things on the agenda, or potential on the agenda. And then there's gonna be another one, and there's a different?
So special session is
I don't know
when
what that means.
either the legislature can petition to call themselves into session, or the governor calls us into session. In this case, the governor will be calling us into special session.
Okay.
So it's a constitutional session is when we start, it's 2-year term. I'm gonna get a little weedy, but it doesn't take long. The first year of the term is the first Wednesday after the first Monday in January, and we end the first Wednesday after the first Monday in June, and that's in our Constitution.
Okay.
The second session, the short session, which until the last 30 years, legislators rarely met in a short session. Short session is the same thing. The first Wednesday after the first Monday in February to the first Wednesday after the first Monday in May. That's regular session. Anything outside that is special session, and we have to be called in either by the governor, or we have to request of the governor that we want to be called in, and he or she would have to call us in if there's a majority of legislators requesting that.
Do they have
So
to-
that's what makes a special session.
But is
Do
the
they
agenda
define what's
preset?
being called for? Is it like
Yes.
special meetings where we have an agenda and you can only do what's on your agenda?
Right.
When you have a
Yes.
special session, do they say, here's what we're gonna talk about, and that's the only things you can talk about, or can you bring up other things?
The call for the session is no, the call doesn't specify it, but it is respectfully understood the specific reasons we're going in. So in other words, we won't go in for absentee ballots and vote on the desegregate Connecticut plan without knowing ahead of time.
Okay.
So we're very well informed what we'll be voting on. Good question. Yeah, no.
Great. Well,
It's process. It's a respect for a process. And that's why doing something as large as even the police accountability bill and the desegregate Connecticut, it's so large and many of us feel should go through the regular legislative process for a fair, public, and open process and discussion, so.
Okay, so the last thing that I will share before we break is Darien continues to do a really good job with COVID. People are wearing their masks. We have, every day and a half, I would say, we have one new case. So, we are still doing great with our total number of cases stands at about 217. It's all on the town website. There's a chart that shows the current week and the number of cases by day. And then there's another link to charts and graphs that show from the beginning of the pandemic to last week's aggregate number of cases. So we're doing very well. Interestingly, over the last probably 2 weeks, more than 50% of the new cases are in young people in their 20s. So, it's diligence is hard. It's been a lot of time.
Frontal cortex.
We had graduations, celebrations in there, so it's probably not a surprise that there's still some virus here. But boy, we're very fortunate that we had our wave early, hopefully. So thank you to everyone who continues to take good care of their own health and the health of the community. We eagerly await the phase 3 reopening, which isn't happening right now.
Right.
And hopefully everybody's aware to be mindful of your travel. There's a whole host of states, it changes every day, that are now high-risk states that you need to self-quarantine when you come back into Connecticut. And I'll be eager to hear if Governor Lamont imposes the same mandate that Governor Cuomo just did yesterday or this morning, where if you fly into the state, you have to register where you're quarantining. And if you don't do that, you're subject to, in New York anyway, a $2,000 fine.
So
If you don't register.
If you
Right.
don't provide your contact information.
So it's most people, if they're traveling from this part of Connecticut, are going to be flying into LaGuardia or JFK.
Yes.
So they're not going to be tracked, even if it would be harder to track. Well, I guess it's on our
But if
system
you're
to
not
get off the
flying,
airplane.
if you're not flying, it's also if you're not
Right.
flying from a state that's been identified.
Correct.
You wouldn't have to. You have to
Right.
answer serious questions or face the $2,000 fine.
Yeah, they'll identify the flights that are landing that are coming from those states in
Right.
question, and then you have to fill out paperwork.
Mm-hmm.
So, last order of business is to look at our OPC minutes of June 20th. I'll entertain any corrections.
I would just say that the statement here that I had feels like I'm standing on a platform in Revolutionary War attire. With clarity of mission to protect taxpayers, the Board of Finance approved a budget. Anyway, so I'm not quite.
Did you say it that
so
way,
I'm
John?
not quite
Wait a minute,
sure.
where
I'm
is
not-
this?
I'm
She's
relatively
like, yeah.
confident that I did not say
She
it that
says
way,
it.
but I
Oh,
like it.
clarity of
So I'm actually not going to change it. In fact, if you would like to sort of embellish my wording like this in the future, I would welcome your attention.
Yeah, I'd like a little Lincoln-esque. You could throw.
I'll bring a stovetop hat next time. so
I'll
that you-
take that sentence next month.
So, approved. I'll move to approve these minutes.
I'll
Second.
As worded.
Tara seconds, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those abstentions, motion carries. Okay, and with
Oh,
that, I'll
wow.
entertain a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn?
Steve, seconded by John, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Great, thank you, everybody,
Thanks.
stay well.
Thank you.